For 118 years, a single family held the throne of England. They were not the longest ruling dynasty, nor were they the most stable, but very few lineages left so profound, fierce, and enduring an imprint. They were born on the battlefield, after decades of civil war. They did what almost no one before them dared imagine. They severed the sacred bond between England and Rome. They challenged the authority of the Pope. They elevated the monarch to supreme leader of the Church of England. At their hands, ancient monasteries were dissolved. Church assets were confiscated. Believers on both sides of the faith were drawn one after another into the fires of persecution. Two queens walked to the execution block. An entire kingdom was torn apart by a question that seemed to belong solely to the soul. Would England belong to Catholicism or Protestantism? Yet from those very tyrannical, ruthless, and contradictory decisions, the Tudors forged a completely different England. An England that no longer bowed to Rome. An England with formidable royal authority. An England looking out toward the oceans. An England harboring ambitions of trade, seafaring, and global power. An England about to enter the age of Elizabeth, Shakespeare, the Spanish Armada, and the dawn of empire. 5 monarchs, 1 family, 118 years of reign. This is the story of the House of Tudor. It was a dynasty born from the blood of civil war. It was raised in the obsession with succession, and it changed England forever. If you love deep insights into royal history, please take a moment to hit the like and subscribe buttons. This is the best way to support us and help us continue telling historical stories like this. And now, buckle up. We are about to begin our journey back in time to the year 1485. Our journey begins on Bosworth Field, where a Plantagenet king fell. From the smoke and dust of battle, an exile named Henry Tudor emerged to give birth to a new dynasty. Part 1. The origins of the House of Tudor, from exile to claimant, to the throne. The history of the House of Tudor did not begin in the resplendent palaces, nor did it begin through the unanimous consent of the English nobility. It began with a figure completely outside the traditional centers of power, Henry Tudor. Born in distant Wales, Henry possessed neither a pure royal bloodline nor an indisputable claim to the succession. The Tudor family was originally a minor noble clan in Wales. It only truly stepped into royal life through a secret marriage between Owen Tudor and the widow of the late king. Henry's claim to the throne rested entirely on his mother's side, Lady Margaret Beaufort. She was a woman of formidable intellect and unwavering resolve. Margaret Beaufort was a descendant of John of Gaunt, son of King Edward III, belonging to the House of Lancaster. However, this line of succession was extremely tenuous and fiercely contested among legal minds of the era. The Beaufort branch originated from an initially unverified marriage. It had also been barred from claiming the throne by royal decree. In an age where bloodline and legitimacy dictated everything, Henry Tudor's claim to power hung like a thin thread, wavering before a storm. Henry Tudor was raised amidst the horrific Wars of the Roses. During this conflict, the houses of Lancaster and York slaughtered one another for the crown. Henry Tudor's life became a continuous saga of flight. The Lancastrian cause suffered a catastrophic defeat. Its key figures were killed one after another. Henry, still a young boy, was forced to flee his homeland into exile. For 14 long years he remained under house arrest and drifted through the duchies of Brittany and France. He lived in a world of diplomatic intrigue. There, he could be bartered or betrayed at any moment. These years forged within Henry a sharp instinct for survival, utmost discretion, and cold calculation. From a hopeless exile, he gradually became the last and only hope of the Lancastrian faction. The tide turned due to fractures within the House of York itself. Richard III ascended to the throne, following the mysterious disappearance of the 2 young princes in the Tower of London. His accession sparked a deep wave of outrage and suspicion among the nobility. A significant portion of Yorkist nobles became disillusioned with Richard III's rule. Alongside the remaining Lancastrian loyalists, they began to look beyond the borders of England. They saw in Henry Tudor an alternative option. He became a rallying flag around which they could unite to overthrow the reigning monarch. In 1485, Henry Tudor decided to stake his entire destiny. He returned to England not as an invading sovereign with unquestioned legitimacy. He returned as a bankrupt gambler, launching a desperate military venture. Henry landed on the Welsh coast with a mixed force of exiles, French mercenaries, and meager local troops. He understood that his chances of success were exceedingly slim. He possessed neither superior numbers nor any absolute guarantees from the domestic nobility. The Battle of Bosworth Field on August 22, 1485, became the fateful moment. Standing on the muddy battlefield, Henry Tudor observed that Richard III's forces outnumbered his own. The outcome would be decided not only by valor, it would also be determined by hesitation and political betrayal. The Stanley family held a massive military force on the fringes of the battlefield. They remained neutral while observing the turning tide. In a desperate attempt to end the battle, Richard III led a fierce cavalry charge directly toward Henry Tudor's position. At one point, Richard's sword slashed within arm's reach of Henry. Richard struck down Henry's standard-bearer. But at that exact life-and-death moment, the Stanley family intervened. Their forces charged into the battle to support Henry's flank. Richard III was unhorsed and killed on the battlefield. The battle ended. Richard III's crown was picked up from a thorn bush. It was then placed upon Henry Tudor's head. He became Henry VII. Yet a military victory, won by the sword, could not instantly grant him legitimacy in the hearts of the populace. The new king stepped across the ruins of Bosworth. There, he faced the greatest question of his reign. How could he make the entire kingdom of England accept that a former exile, with a deeply contested bloodline, was now their lawful and legitimate sovereign? The House of Tudor did not begin as an established dynasty. It began as a high-stakes political and military gamble by Henry Tudor. Through that gamble, he transformed his status as an exile into the throne of England. Yet Henry VII needed far more than a sword to transform a single victory into a lasting dynasty. He needed powerful symbols. He needed a strategic marriage. He needed money. He also needed an apparatus of power strong enough to ensure that England would never plunge back into civil war. Part 2. Henry V, turning victory into legitimacy. When the cheers on Bosworth Field fell silent, Henry VII was forced to face a harsh reality. His hold on the throne was extremely fragile. England had endured decades of civil war. During that period, overthrown and murdered kings had become the norm. The English nobility had grown accustomed to taking up arms against the crown. In the eyes of many, Henry was merely a fortunate usurper. Henry VII's first major political move to establish his legitimacy was his marriage to Elizabeth of York. She was the daughter of the late King Edward IV. This was no ordinary royal wedding. It was a masterpiece of political strategy and public symbolism. The marriage united the rival houses of Lancaster and York after decades of slaughter. Henry VII wanted to engrave that message into the minds of the populace. He therefore created the symbol of the Tudor rose. The emblem combined the red rose of Lancaster with the white rose of York. The Tudor rose appeared across architecture, currency, and royal documents. It conveyed an exceptionally powerful political message. The devastating civil war had come to an end. A new era of harmony had begun. Yet Henry VII was too pragmatic a politician to rely solely on symbols. He understood that the loyalty of the nobility came not from love, but from fear and dependency. Henry began tightening royal authority through a series of cold legal and financial measures. He established the Court of Star Chamber. This judicial body operated under the direct control of the king. It was specifically designed to punish powerful nobles whom local courts could not touch. Henry also enacted strict laws prohibiting feudal families from maintaining private armies. These measures stripped the nobility of its most dangerous military weapon. Instead of wasting resources on costly European wars in pursuit of personal glory, Henry VII chose diplomacy and accumulation. He enforced an austere financial policy. He imposed heavy fines on disobedient nobles rather than sentencing them to death. This system drained the financial strength of potential rebels. At the same time, it enriched the royal treasury. Through meticulous calculation bordering on miserliness, Henry VII transformed an empty treasury into an abundant reserve. On the international stage, Henry VII systematically elevated the standing of the young Tudor dynasty. He achieved this through strategic marriage alliances. Henry arranged the marriage of his eldest son, Arthur, to Princess Catherine of Aragon. She came from Spain, one of the most powerful rising kingdoms in Europe at the time. Henry also married his daughter Margaret to King James IV of Scotland. That marriage planted the seeds for the future union of the English and Scottish crowns. When Henry VII died in 1509, he left behind no dazzling legend of glorious conquest. Yet he had completed a foundational historical mission. He transformed an insecure throne, seized from an enemy, into a stable and enduring crown. He left his successor a peaceful kingdom. He also left behind an efficient administrative system and a wealthy royal treasury. Henry VII was not the most dazzling monarch of the Tudor line, but he was the man who transformed a fragile victory into the essential foundation of the dynasty. Yet the stability Henry VII created through cold calculation was inherited by a man of an entirely different nature. That man was Henry V. He was a young, brilliant, and ambitious monarch. He would ultimately shake both the church and the English throne to their very foundations. Part 3. Henry V. The obsession with an heir and the break with Rome. Stepping out from the cautious shadow of his father, Henry V ascended the throne in 1509, at the age of 18. He brought with him all the youth and splendor of an ideal Renaissance sovereign. Henry was intellectually gifted. He was skilled in martial arts and highly educated. At the beginning of his reign, he was also a deeply devout Catholic. His religious devotion earned him the title Defender of the Faith from the Pope. Henry married Catherine of Aragon, the widow of his deceased elder brother. The marriage was intended to preserve the powerful alliance with Spain, yet after more than 2 decades, Henry's greatest crisis emerged. Catherine failed to provide him with a surviving male heir. Only their daughter, Princess Mary, survived infancy. For the Tudor king, the absence of a male heir was not merely a personal tragedy. It represented the threat of another civil war that could destroy the young dynasty. The crisis became even more explosive when Henry fell in love with Anne Boleyn. She was a sharp and ambitious lady of the royal court. Anne refused to accept the king unless he made her his lawful queen. Henry asked the Pope in Rome to annul his marriage to Catherine. The Pope refused. Faced with that rejection, Henry V made a decision that permanently altered the destiny of England. He severed England's ties with the Vatican. Through the Act of Supremacy in 1534, Henry declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England. This decision launched a religious reformation imposed from the throne. Henry ordered the dissolution of the monasteries. Vast quantities of Catholic property and land were confiscated. The wealth flowed into the royal treasury and into the hands of those loyal to the crown. At the same time, the religious life of the English population was profoundly disrupted. Henry's obsession with securing an heir continued to drag him into a bloody cycle of marriages. The relationship for which he had sacrificed England's bond with Rome quickly ended in tragedy. Anne Boleyn gave birth not to a prince, but to Princess Elizabeth. Anne was later imprisoned in the Tower of London. She was executed on charges of treason. Henry's third wife, Jane Seymour, finally gave birth to the son he had desperately desired. The child was named Edward. Jane Seymour died shortly after giving birth. The cycle continued with Henry's failed diplomatic marriage to Anne of Cleves. It was followed by the tragic execution of the young Catherine Howard. The cycle finally ended with his sixth wife, Catherine Parr. She skillfully survived life beside the aging king. She cared for Henry during his declining years. She also helped reconcile his children and restore them to the line of succession. 6 wives, 2 executed queens, 1 massive religious reformation. Henry V used the iron fist of authoritarian rule to dominate both church and court. His policies planted the seeds of deep religious division. At the same time, they forged an English state completely independent from Rome. Henry V wanted a son who could preserve the Tudor dynasty, but in pursuit of that heir, he transformed the religion, politics, and power structure of England. In the end, Henry obtained the son he had spent his life pursuing. Yet the paradox of the House of Tudor was already becoming clear. What they desired most always arrived too late. It often proved far too fragile, and it was rarely able to endure for long. Part 4. Edward VI, the long-awaited heir who died too soon. When Henry VIII passed away, in 1547, the crown was handed down to Edward VI. He was the son Henry had traded for with his reputation, his faith, and the blood of 2 wives. Edward ascended the throne at the age of 9. The young boy was the answer to every prayer of the House of Tudor. He was a legitimate male prince. He was exceptionally intelligent and educated by leading scholars in humanism and Reformed theology. However, the king was still too young to rule independently. Practical power, therefore, fell into the hands of the Regency Council. The council was initially led by Edward's maternal uncle, Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset. It was later controlled by John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland. The regents exerted a powerful influence over the government. The young monarch himself also passionately supported religious reform. Under their leadership, the English Reformation moved far beyond the organizational separation begun by Henry V. It developed into a radical theological revolution. England drifted further and further away from its ancient Catholic traditions. Archbishop Thomas Cranmer issued the English Book of Common Prayer. Its use was made compulsory throughout the kingdom. It replaced the traditional Latin Mass. Sacred statues inside churches were smashed. Religious paintings on church walls were erased. Stone altars were replaced with simple wooden tables. The spiritual life of the population was stripped of many of its traditional mystical elements. They were replaced by a rigorous Protestant theology. Yet the Tudor tragedy of succession returned once again. Edward VI possessed an extremely frail constitution. In 1553, at only 15 years old, the teenage king contracted severe pulmonary tuberculosis. His health deteriorated rapidly. Aware that death was approaching, Edward VI fell into a state of spiritual panic. He understood the consequences of the Succession Act left by his father. Under that law, the next person entitled to inherit the throne was his half-sister Mary. Mary was a devout Catholic. Edward feared that the entire Protestant Reformation, built by him and his advisors, would be destroyed. During his final days, Edward VI drafted a new succession document. He acted under the influence of the Duke of Northumberland. The document arbitrarily excluded both of Edward's half-sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, from the succession. Instead, the throne was left to Lady Jane Grey. She was a 16-year-old descendant of the Tudor royal family and a devout Protestant. In July 1553, Edward VI closed his eyes forever. His premature death immediately triggered a fierce political crisis. Lady Jane Grey was placed upon the throne. She became known in English history as the 9 Days Queen. But the Protestant faction's attempt to overturn the established order of succession failed miserably. It collapsed in the face of widespread public outrage. Regardless of their religion, the English people still valued the legitimacy of Tudor blood. Mary quickly gathered an army. She marched toward London amid the cheers of the population. Mary reclaimed the crown that she believed rightfully belonged to her. Lady Jane Grey was overthrown. She was later led to the execution block at a tragically young age. Edward VI had been the answer to Henry V's lifelong obsession. But his premature death proved that the Tudor succession crisis had never truly been resolved. After Edward's death, the succession question was no longer merely about how the Tudor bloodline would continue. It became the defining question for the very soul of England. Would the nation belong to Catholicism or Protestantism? Part 5. Mary I. Bloody Mary and the Catholic Counteroffensive. Mary I entered London in triumph. She became the first woman in history to govern England officially and independently as Queen Regnant. Yet behind the glory of victory stood a woman carrying deep personal scars. Mary was the daughter of Catherine of Aragon. After Henry VI annulled his marriage to her mother, Mary was declared illegitimate. She was stripped of her title as princess. She was separated from her mother. She was also forced to renounce her Catholic faith. Mary spent much of her youth living under constant threat and humiliation. These experiences forged within her a Catholic faith so resolute that it bordered on fanaticism. When Mary ascended the throne, she did not view her victory merely as the restoration of her personal power. She believed she had received a divine mission. She sought to restore the honor of her deceased mother. She intended to cleanse the sin created by her father's separation from Rome. She also sought to return England to the authority of the Pope. Mary's first major controversial political decision was her marriage to Crown Prince Philip of Spain. He would later become King Philip II. To Mary, the marriage represented the perfect alliance for strengthening Catholic power. But to the English nobility and public, it appeared to be a diplomatic disaster. The English feared that their country would become a subordinate state of the mighty Spanish Empire. They also feared that England would be dragged into costly continental wars. Public discontent erupted into rebellion. Mary crushed every uprising against her rule. Her religious mission rapidly transformed into a widespread campaign of persecution. She restored the ancient laws against heresy. She then launched a purge against Protestants. During her 5-year reign, Mary I ordered more than 280 people accused of heresy to be burned at the stake across England. Among the victims were leading Protestant reformers. They included Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, Bishop Nicholas Ridley, and Hugh Latimer. Flames rose from the execution pyres at Smithfield. The burnings engraved an image of brutality into the minds of the English people. They spread fear and hatred throughout the kingdom. From these executions by fire, the historical epithet, Bloody Mary, was born. However, when viewed objectively, and in the context of the period, Mary I's actions did not arise solely from personal cruelty or malice. Within the religious mindset of the 16th century, Mary sincerely believed that she was saving the souls of her subjects. She believed that heresy condemned them to eternal damnation. By eradicating it, she thought she was protecting them from hell. Her ruthlessness was therefore the product of absolute religious conviction during a turbulent age. The reign of Mary I ended in comprehensive bitterness. Her alliance with Spain drew England into a war against France. That conflict caused England to lose Calais in 1558. Calais was England's final military and commercial stronghold on the European continent. Its loss dealt a painful blow to English national pride. At the same time, Mary's attempts to produce an heir ended in illness and the agony of phantom pregnancies. In 1558, Mary I died in solitude and despair. She realized that the flames of persecution had failed to destroy Protestantism. Instead, Those who were burned had been transformed into martyrs. Their deaths embedded a profound hatred of Roman Catholicism within the English national identity. Mary I attempted to return England to its Catholic past, but the fires of persecution made the memory of her reign a bloody one. They also deepened the religious division within the kingdom. When Mary died, the throne passed to the half-sister, whom she had once suspected and imprisoned. That woman was Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn. Part 6. Elizabeth I, the Apogee, and the Tudor legend. Elizabeth I stepped onto the throne at the age of 25. She inherited a kingdom teetering on the brink of collapse. The royal treasury was exhausted. The population was deeply divided after the religious purges of her sister. England stood internationally isolated. The kingdom was also trapped in a disastrous war with France. Elizabeth was the daughter of Anne Boleyn, a woman once branded a usurper and beheaded. Elizabeth herself had been declared illegitimate. Under Mary I, she had also faced the possibility of execution inside the Tower of London. Yet those very tribulations forged an extraordinary sovereign. Elizabeth possessed the masterful political cunning of her grandfather, Henry VII. She also carried the iron will of her father, Henry V. Elizabeth I was acutely aware of the dangers of religious extremism. She therefore chose a strategically moderate path, known as the Elizabethan religious settlement. She re-established the Church of England along Protestant lines. However, she retained many traditional rituals and administrative structures. This approach prevented the moderate Catholic majority from becoming completely alienated. Elizabeth famously declared that she had no desire to make windows into men's souls. Her religious policy created a relatively stable space in which the kingdom could survive. One of the greatest pressures facing Elizabeth was the question of marriage and producing an heir. The nobility and parliament repeatedly urged her to marry and secure the Tudor succession. But Elizabeth understood the political dangers surrounding every possible marriage. Marrying a foreign prince could make England subordinate to another European power. Marrying an English noble could provoke jealousy and factional conflict inside the royal court. Elizabeth responded with a stroke of political genius. She rejected every marriage proposal. She transformed her unmarried status into the ultimate political instrument. Elizabeth carefully constructed the image of the Virgin Queen. She presented herself as a monarch married to her country and her people. Nevertheless, the specter of a succession crisis constantly loomed over her reign. The epicenter of the conspiracies against Elizabeth was Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots. Mary was Elizabeth's Catholic cousin. She also possessed a legitimate claim to the English throne. For nearly 2 decades, Mary Stuart became a rallying symbol for Catholic rebellion within England. She was also connected to assassination conspiracies, supported by Spain and the Vatican. Elizabeth spent years deliberating and hesitating over Mary's fate. Eventually, she was confronted with evidence linking Mary to a conspiracy against her life. In 1587, Elizabeth finally signed the execution warrant for Mary Stuart. The execution of Mary Stuart became the final provocation for King Philip II of Spain. He prepared to launch an all-out war against England. In 1588, the Spanish Armada sailed into the English Channel. It consisted of approximately 130 massive warships. Its mission was to overthrow Elizabeth and crush Protestant England. The threat of invasion spread fear throughout the kingdom. Elizabeth appeared before her troops at Tilbury, wearing silver armor. There, she delivered one of the most immortal declarations in English history. "I know I have the body, but of a weak and feeble woman. But I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." The English Navy confronted the Armada with flexible naval tactics. English commanders also deployed fireships against the tightly grouped Spanish fleet. Severe storms further devastated the invading force. Together, These forces shattered the Spanish Armada. The victory of 1588 was not merely a military miracle. It became a symbol of the survival of an independent Protestant nation. It also marked the formidable rise of England as a maritime power. The Elizabethan era witnessed a magnificent expansion of culture and economic activity. It became the golden age of English Renaissance literature and theatre. The era produced the immortal works of William Shakespeare. It also witnessed the brilliance of playwrights such as Christopher Marlowe. English mariners began carrying the nation's ambitions across the oceans. Francis Drake circumnavigated the globe and challenged Spanish power at sea. Walter Raleigh promoted exploration and overseas expansion. These voyages began to challenge Spanish and Portuguese dominance. Elizabeth's reign did not instantly transform England into a global empire. The rise of that empire would require several more centuries. However, Elizabeth encouraged the creation of trading companies. She also supported ambitious oceanic expeditions. Through these policies, Elizabeth I laid the first foundations of England's maritime ambitions. She helped prepare the conditions for the future formation of the British Empire. Elizabeth I did not merely defeat England's external enemies. She helped the English people forge an entirely new national identity. England increasingly defined itself as a Protestant nation. It stood independent from the authority of Rome. It confidently confronted the great continental powers. It also began to look beyond Europe toward the oceans. Elizabeth I transformed the vulnerability of the Tudor dynasty into a timeless legend. Under her rule, England survived its religious and diplomatic crises. The kingdom also began looking toward the seas as the source of its future. Yet there was a profound irony at the heart of her triumph. The monarch who brought the House of Tudor to its greatest height would also bring its bloodline to an end. Part 7. The End of the House of Tudor and the Legacy Left Behind. As the years passed, the once dazzling Virgin Queen confronted old age and mortality. During her final years, Elizabeth witnessed her lifelong friends and loyal advisors die one after another. The English economy began sinking into recession. Factional struggles also erupted within the royal court. For decades, discussion of the succession had effectively been forbidden. Now the question returned one final time. On March 24, 1603, Elizabeth I drew her final breath at Richmond Palace. She died at the age of 69. Her death concluded 44 remarkable years of rule. Elizabeth left no direct heir. Secretary Robert Cecil carefully arranged a peaceful transfer of power. The English crown passed to King James VI of Scotland. James was the son of Mary Stuart. He also carried the blood of Margaret Tudor, the daughter of Henry VII. James VI of Scotland ascended the English throne as James I. His accession gave birth to the Stuart dynasty in England. It also united the crowns of England and Scotland under a single monarch. The Tudor dynasty officially came to an end. The House of Tudor had begun with a bloody battle on the muddy field of Bosworth, but it did not end amid the clash of swords on another battlefield. It ended inside the quiet chamber of a childless queen. Its final moment came upon a royal bed. To understand the true magnitude of the Tudor dynasty, we must compare England at two decisive moments. The first was the year 1485, when Henry VII ascended the throne. The second was the year 1603, when Elizabeth I died. In 1485, England was an exhausted nation, emerging from prolonged feudal civil wars. The throne was profoundly unstable. It could still be overthrown by a powerful rebellion of the nobility. The ruling elite remained fractured. The economy had stagnated. Structurally, England was still a minor Catholic kingdom. It remained dependent upon the religious authority of Rome. It also stood on the fringes of European power politics. At that moment, the future of the Tudor dynasty was as fragile as a candle flame in the wind. By 1603, England had been transformed into an entirely different nation. Royal authority had been heavily centralized. An increasingly efficient legal and parliamentary system strengthened the government. The private military power of the feudal nobility had been shattered. England now possessed an independent national church. That church carried a distinct Protestant identity. The interference of the Holy See in Rome had been severed. Elizabethan culture flourished with extraordinary brilliance. The English language was elevated into a supreme medium of literature and art. Most importantly, England no longer confined its ambitions to narrow territorial disputes on the European continent. The kingdom possessed a formidable navy. It had developed an increasingly confident merchant class. It also possessed a strategic vision directed toward the vast oceans. 5 monarchs, 1 family, 118 years of reign. The House of Tudor was born from the blood and fire of civil war. It was raised beneath the constant obsession with royal succession. Its monarchs ruled through authoritarian power and deeply contradictory decisions. Yet through all their achievements and tragedies, the Tudors reshaped the political structure of England. They transformed the kingdom's religious identity. They also remolded its social order. They helped turn a weak feudal island into a confident European power. In doing so, they laid crucial foundations for the rise of the British Empire on the world stage in the centuries that followed. Thank you for accompanying us through the 118-year saga of the Tudor dynasty. This was the family that forged an entirely new England. Its reign changed the course of world history forever. If this documentary has offered you valuable and profound insights, please share your thoughts in the comment section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Together, we will continue exploring the hidden pages of human history. Goodbye, and we will see you again on our next historical journey.